Thank you.
찬양 가사처럼
Just like the
저희들에게
lyrics of the choral anthem,
독사 말씀을 통하여서
may the word of redemptive history that we've heard all our lives, may it be a spring of living water that is allowed to us.
구절을 가지고서
With the verses that our presiding pastor read, we'll take a look at the redemptive historical administration of the construction period of 6 years and 6 months of Solomon's temple. We are now reading book 4 of April, and
강의를 하게 됩니다.
in the third worship service, we'll be giving lectures based on the fourth book. And when you look at each book of the History of Redemption series, there is an expression that our founding pastor emphasized, and that is the first time in history.
솔로몬 성전 건축기가
And in book 4,
굉장히 강하게 많이 강조를 하셨습니다.
there is great emphasis on the construction period of Solomon's temple, 6 years and 6 months. And when I look back and think back about the time back then,
너무너무 많이 강조하셨던
our founding pastor emphasized so many times how amazing and important this is. And he had many special lectures to teach us. And at the time, the calculation of the years seems so complex. And I remember it was very hard for us to understand. But one thing that I look back and think about is the 6 years and 6 months. We just thought, oh, it's not 7 years and 6 months. But we didn't know why it's so shocking and amazing and what kind of administration it contains. And we haven't actually pondered on that, and at least for me. So as I read book 4 again, I thought, what secret does this contain that our founding pastor emphasized so much, 6 years and 6 months, that he said he revealed that this was revealed for the first time in history. And that is how I prepared the sermon. In every book of the History of Redemption series, our founding pastor said there are jewels and treasures inside it. And if you yearn for it and long for it, you will find it. And we are still looking for it now. But as we continue to do so until we gain eternal life, may the joy of the word always be with us. We'll take a look at Solomon's temple today. And before we go into that, we'll take a look at the background. And that is the tabernacle. The Israelites at Mount Sinai, God showed his presence through the tabernacle. So this tabernacle is called the gospel of the eyes. It's the word of God that can be seen through the eyes. And God, through the Sinaitic covenant that he established with the Israelites on Mount Sinai, he made this into the tabernacle, and so that it can be seen through the tabernacle. And at the time, most people, the Levites or the priests, and most of the people were not able to read. They were illiterate. But even in a time like that, the tabernacle, which was in the center of wherever they lodged, whenever they saw the tabernacle, they can see and understand that God is there, that God is with them, and see the revelation of God through the materials and the plans of the tabernacle. That was the gospel of the eyes. So Solomon's temple, which we'll take a look at today, this is also the gospel of the eyes. Before Solomon's temple was built, David restored the Ark of the Covenant and prayed earnestly. My house is so beautiful, but God's Ark of the Covenant is in those curtains. And he wanted to build God's house. So in 2 Samuel, God established a covenant with David, and as the gospel of the eyes, he allowed Solomon's temple to be constructed. So Solomon, David's son, constructed the temple.
성전 건축에는
And with this construction,
하나하나 지시하신 대로 그대로 실현되고
it was
그대로 완공되는
visualized just as God instructed one by one. And this is a compression of God's work.
이 솔로몬 성전의 특징에 대해서
First, we'll take a look at the characteristics of Solomon's temple.
솔로몬 성전의
The characteristics of Solomon's temple.
작은 첫 번째로
Small point number one,
중심주의가
it is that it is centered on God. The
이것은
temple shows that it is centered on God. In other words, God's absolute authority. 2 Samuel 7, verses 1 to 3, it says clearly that David was the one who wanted to build God's temple. And many
신전 혹은 뭐 부처에게 바치는 신전 여러 가지 신전들을 봐도 사람들이 마음을 먹고
And many temples and shrines that we can see through history, many people built and dedicated those shrines and temples to gods. But Solomon's temple is greatly different from those temples that were given to those small gods.
사람을 위한 성전이 아니라 오직 하나님을 위한 성.
1 Chronicles 29 verse 16 says clearly that this is not for humans but for God.
16절에서 이 성전을 지었던
And
어마어마한 건축 재료들
David prepared all
이스라엘 백성에게
the numerous materials
지었다라고 하는 것이
for
하나님께서 주셔가지고
for God's temple. And he said, David did not say that he prepared all the materials for God's temple, but that it was given to him by God.
그 명령의
In the visual world, in the world that we see, God
재물도
had David prepared a temple, but actually
절대 주권이 드러나 있는 성전이
this temple started with what God gave them. So it shows God's absolute authority. And the second characteristic of Solomon's temple is that it was built in a place that had been prepared.
예비하신 장소 미리 계획하신 그 장소에
It was a place that God had already prepared beforehand.
우리가 역대하 3장 1절 말씀
When we
보면
look at 2 Chronicles 3, verse 1,
여호와의 전 건축하기
it says, Then Solomon began to build the house of the Lord in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, where the Lord had appeared to his father David, at the place that David had prepared on the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite.
다윗이 정한 곳이었고
Outwardly, it may seem like David has decided on this location, but when you look clearly, there are two expressions that describe this place. And first, it is Mount Moriah in Jerusalem.
22장에 나오는
And this refers to the location where Abraham offered up Isaac by faith in Genesis 22.
바로 이 모리아산이라는 표현입니다. 그래서 역대상 22장 1절 말씀에서는 이 자리를
So
가리켜서
in 1 Chronicles 22, verse 1,
번제단이라고 표현하고
it
있습니다.
says it is
자기 사랑하는 아들까지
the place where David offered up sacrifice,
그 아들이 죽을 것이라고 생각한 것이 아니라 죽는다 할지라도
where Abraham offered up sacrifice. And he believed and had faith that his son would not die, and even if he did die, that he would be
두
resurrected.
번째 내용을 보니까 이곳은
And second,
오르난의 타작마당이라고
it's the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. The name Ornan in 2 Samuel is translated to Araunah, and it's the same person. And at the time, threshing floor was on the highest location in the city. When they threshed the grains, they had to have the chaffs be gone, so they were in a place where the wind blew.
바로 그 자리인지 그냥 그 지역 어딘가겠거니는 알고 있지만 그 산 중에서도 정확히 어디에서 아브라함이 이삭을 번제로 바쳤는지는 알지 못했습니다.
Up until then, we did not know where exactly that God
다윗으로 하여금
had Abraham offer up Isaac and in exactly what location in Mount Moriah, but God remembered this place.
다윗이 인구조사라는
But
문제를
actually, this was not
자기 백성이
something that could be boasted about because this happened after David numbered the people and thoroughly repented.
바로 이 아라우나의 타작마당이었기 때문입니다.
And that was the place of the threshing floor of Ornan. Or in other words, this threshing floor of Ornan or Araunah
터가 있는 곳이라는
was a place of David's thorough
솔로몬
repentance.
성전이 지어진 예비하신 장소는 어디였느냐? 바로
Where was this place that God had prepared, Solomon's temple, that was the foundation of Abraham's faith and on top of David's thorough repentance?
오늘날 저와 여러분도
Today, you and I,
일어나
we are in this history where we rebuild and reconstruct the temple in our hearts. God does not just build it anywhere, but when we dedicate ourselves and on that foundation of faith and repent, God will allow the temples that we build to be built on such places. And third, it was built according to the pattern. 1 Chronicles 28 verses 11 through 19 says, David, just as God had showed him, all the plans that God had showed him, he passed it on and prepared that for Solomon. All the buildings and the patterns and everything, David had prepared all those things. And when you look at verse 19, when we look at the expression and the word pattern, we think about a blueprint. So in the picture that is on the right, David is showing Solomon a blueprint. But even if Solomon had 10 master's degrees on construction, he can't make the plan and the Solomon's temple exactly as God has showed him. If God had told him to put a pattern here, how would he know if it's a wave pattern or a leaf pattern? He wouldn't know unless he saw it. But the word pattern here is tab knit. And it doesn't mean a picture, but it's a structure or a shape or form. So God, when he showed David the patterns of Solomon's temple, he did not show a blueprint, but the shape, what kind of structure it actually has. Because David was able to see it with his eyes, if there was to be a pattern, he would know how big it's supposed to be and what pattern it had and what the materials were, and that's how he was able to know and remember. And because this is not a blueprint, if it was a blueprint, he could have drawn it well and gave it to Solomon, and that would have ended there. But God had showed him the temple itself, so it's not just one blueprint. And passing that on does not just take one day. David thoroughly, while preparing Solomon for the throne, he would have told him, this pattern goes here, this building is here, and on the floor it has to be this pattern and this material. And he gave it in great detail, even to the point that Solomon would dream about it. And he would have taught it repeatedly. When we look in Exodus 25, verse 9, or 40, or Exodus 26, verse 30, when God built the tabernacle in the wilderness, he showed the pattern to Moses. The pattern that he showed to Moses was also not just the blueprint, but he allowed Moses to experience and see the tabernacle itself so that it can be constructed perfectly just as God wanted it.
히브리서 8장 5절 말씀.
Hebrews 8, verse 5
솔로몬 성전이나
says the tabernacle or Solomon's temple, all the buildings and temples and tabernacles that were built according to God's command was a copy and a shadow of the heavenly things. Before we move, we go to a model house and we see how the apartment is like. And when we go and see, let's say the room was white and it had a window that faced the south and the rooms were very large. But let's say you actually moved in, or I actually moved in, and the walls were black and the windows were to the west and their rooms were strange. Then the model house and the house that I actually moved to is different. But God chose the copy and the shadow of the world that we will live in heaven. And that's how He showed us the tabernacle. And just as the model house is the same as the place we'll live, or the apartment, God worked so that the tabernacle or the temple is a replica of what is in heaven. And today, the temple that is in our hearts and the temple of Pyungkang, we believe that it is a pattern that God had constructed and has to be fulfilled according to the way that God wants it. Big point number 2, let's look at the construction period of Solomon's temple. The construction period of Solomon's temple. Small point number 1, there are understandings required in the calculation of the regnal chronology. And there are 2 things that we need to know. First, we need to know how to calculate the regnal years of the kings. And what this means is at the time, let's say 2024, 2023, that was not how they counted the years. And even during the Joseon dynasty of our country, we said first year of Sejong or second year of Sejong. We used the names of the kings. And in the same way, Israel at the time, they counted the year of the king's reign with their name. And the method of doing so, there were 2 methods. First is the accession year method. Let's say King A started to reign and reigned for 19 years and died. And his son, the year that he became king, the accession year calls this the accession year, and the year after that is the first year of his reign. Why do they do that? Let's say you say you're living on the 20th year of King A, and you ask the people, what year is it now? Then they have to say it's the 20th year of King A. Let's say that even if the king died in the first month, that year doesn't become and have 2 names. The son, the king's son, even if he became king in the first month of the year, his reign becomes the first reign the following year. So let's say President Moon Jae-in, the 5th year of his rule, and President Yoon Suk-yeol, even if Yoon Suk-yeol became the president in that year, his year is considered the first year after that year is over. And the non-accession year method has 2 names for that first year. It would be the 20th year of King A and the first year of King B. So they don't have a separate accession year, and they just have the first year of reign, and that year has 2 names. And the northern Israel usually use this method. We need to understand that Solomon used the accession year method. And the second thing that we need to know is the first month of the year. There's the Nisan method and the Tishri method. The Nisan method is when the year begins with Nisan, the first month, and that's the 12 months from Nisan, from the first month to the first month. On the other hand, the Tishri method, the year begins with Tishri, the 7th month or July. It's until the 7th month until the next 7th month. That is 1 year. We might think, doesn't it have to be the first year? But there are reasons that people use it this way. And for Nisan, it's nice to calculate the feasts. The Israelites all had to keep the 3 major feasts. And the Passover was a feast that commemorated their salvation. It was their exodus from Egypt and from the world, and that's in the first month in Nisan. And in the 3rd month, there's the Feast of Weeks, which is 7 weeks from the Passover, or in other words, the Pentecost. And an important event that happened in the Feast of Weeks is when they received the covenant, the 10 commandments, and the laws. And in the New Testament is the coming of the Holy Spirit. And in the 7th month, there was the Feast of Booths. The Israelites would gather all their farming and crops, and in the 7th month, they would gather at Jerusalem, and they would gather in the tents and booths, and they would give thanks for the crops that they had gathered in the Feast of Ingathering. If you look at this in the Nisan method, it would be in order from Passover to the Feast of Booths. But why did they use the Tishri method then? When they actually lived in their actual lives, would it be easier to understand by saying planting the seed first or starting with gathering the crops? It's easier to talk about the year when you say you plant the seeds and then gather the crops. So the early rain comes down in the 7th month, and they cultivate and plant the barley and wheat. And then there's the late rain, and they gather the barley and wheat. That's the Tishri method. So this is the civil calendar, the calendar that was easy for the Israelites to use on a daily basis. So sometimes they would use the Nisan method, and sometimes they would use the Tishri method, and we need to tell them apart well in order to understand the calculations in the Bible. When we look at the construction period of Solomon's temple, Solomon became king in 970 BC, and this is archaeological evidence, and theologians and scholars, they calculate this as the absolute year. 970 BC is the solar calendar method. We are living in the year 2024, and when we go back to 970 BC, that was when Solomon started to reign. Is the calendar of Israel the lunar calendar or the solar calendar? It's the lunar calendar. So because it's the lunar calendar, it's a bit different. So Nisan and Tishri is repeated, and I shortened this, abbreviated this to N and T. When you look at this, the 970 BC 970, this is the accession year, And this is still part of that year because it's still in, if you calculate it with the Nissan method. But if you look at it with the Tishiri method, unlike the Nissan method, it starts from the 7th month. So the accession year starts in the 7th month. So we can see that the two calendars cross over like this. And when we calculate this, there is a difference of 6 months. So it's easier if you look at it from the point where they overlap. When we look at 1 Kings 6, verse 38, it says, in the 11th year, in the month of Bull, which is the 8th month, the house was finished throughout all its parts and according to all its plans. So the 8th month, it does not change. The 8th month of the 11th year, it does not change. So when we go backward from here, when we think about it from the Nissan method, when you fill and count those years, there would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. There would be 9 slots. But full year would be 7, and apart the 5 months and 1 month, it would be a total of 7 months, 7 years and 6 months, or rounded up to 8 years. But in 1 Kings 6, verse 38, it says that it took 7 years. So we can see that the Bible was not recorded with the Nissan method, that Solomon did not use the Nissan method during his reign. And when we calculate this from the Tishiri method, it changes once again. The year of construction finished is the month of Bull, so this is the same. And our founding pastor, at the time, this is very difficult for us to understand. So in order to help us understand, he said it's easier to memorize that the 4th year of rule is the 5th year in the Nissan method. But when we think about this, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years and 5 months from the month of Ziv. That is 5 months until Tishiri. And from the 7th month to the 8th month, there is 1 month. So it's 6 years and 6 months. So our founding pastor emphasized this and said that the construction period of Solomon's temple was 7 years because it was rounded up. And when you count it by year, it's 7 years, and the exact period it took was 6 years and 6 months. And up until here, we learned this a lot. So what meaning does this contain, and why is it important? We took a look at the Solomon's years of reign with the Tishiri method. And this is the 1st year, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th year. And with the Tishiri method, if you calculate the years, you get 8 years again. It's confusing, right? Using this method and that method. But we are counting the 6 years and 6 months. But when we look at it, from the 4th year of reign to the 11th year of reign, it's 11 months. But when we calculate and say this, we use the Nissan method from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
성전을 건축했다라고 횟수로 이야기를 하고 있어요.
And that's how we express
그러니까 여기서 한 가지
the
이상한
year
건
that he took.
아니
And
왜
what
솔로몬 통치기가
is strange here,
할 때는 티시리 기준 방식을 쓰고
why does it use the Tishri
여기에
method
성전을
in
지은
this?
동안이 7년이었더라라고 이야기할 때는
And why does it say
방식을 써가지고
it uses the Nissan method to say it took 7 years? And in this, there is a great secret to this as well.
이산 기준 방식으로 계수해서 7년으로
So this is 7 years based on the Nissan cycle method. As I've mentioned before, to think about it with the Nissan method is talking about the 3 major feasts. The Passover, which is in Nisan, Pentecost, which is in the 3rd month, and the Feast of Booths, which is in the 7th month. That is counting the year with the Nisan cycle. The Passover was a feast that celebrates being saved from the plague of the firstborn and the Exodus.
언약 백성으로 말씀을 받고 거듭나는 것을 가리키는 절기가 됩니다. 그리고 마지막 절기인 초막절은
And the Feast of Booths,
저장하고 초막 가운데 거하는 절기.
they gathered the results of their hard work, and it means and celebrates being gathered into the heavenly storeroom.
절기도 저희가 다시 그래프를 그려보면요.
So when we look at this, they keep the Passover.
방식으로는 솔로몬 통치 4년, 이산 방식으로는 통치 5년에 있었던 6월절을 지킨 다음에
They keep the Passover,
성전 건축이 시작이 됩니다.
and then in the 2nd month, the construction begins.
6월절을 지킨 자, 하나님의
Those who have kept the Passover, those who received God's salvation, can partake in the construction of the temple. The temple is not built with people that are aliens or have nothing to do with the covenant of God, but by God's people, the covenantal people. And you have the Feast of Weeks and the Feast of Booths.
제일 먼저 나팔절에 다 모이고 10일이 되면은 대속제일을 지키거든요. 그럼 이스라엘 전체 죄가 다 사해졌어요.
So in the Passover, they have all their sins forgiven.
자리에서 거하게 되는데
And in the Feast of Booths, they all go in the tents.
6월절에 대상자가 되는 겁니다.
But after 6 months later, you have to receive salvation again. And you have to be renewed again and go into the tents or the booths again. And in 6 months, you have to do that again.
하나님의 구속 모형이
So with the feasts, there are 7 cycles of these feasts. So the 7th Feast of Booths or the Feast of Ingathering, after this is over, in the 8th month, the temple, the tabernacle, the temple was completed. And the feasts have completed. The 6 months, 6 years and 6 months is so important because the cycle of feasts are 7 cycles within this period. Our founding pastor emphasized 6 years and 6 months not because of the knowledge that this is so surprising and amazing, but because it contains God's amazing redemptive administration, starting with the Passover. And after a cycle of 7 feasts, the Temple of Solomon was completed. When we look at 1 Kings 8, verses 1 through 3 and 10 through 11, Solomon's temple was completed and God's glory came down. And it was so great that they could not even stand. And the cloud filled the house of the Lord. But this model or this pattern in the Old Testament was not full and whole. So that's why the cross had to take place. Today, as we fulfill the construction of the temples in our lives, We must be used by God, and at last we will complete all the feasts and observe all the feasts and be used greatly to construct and finish the construction of the temple. In John 2, verses 19 to 21, and Revelation 21, verse 22, it doesn't just talk about the visible temple. Jesus said that He is the temple, and the heaven that we will be going to. The Revelation 20, chapter 21 says, You saw and you see no temple in it, that God is the temple. The temple is not just a visible building, but we must become workers that participate in building this temple. Lastly, third, the number of people who participated in constructing Solomon's temple. What's so important about the number of people who built this temple? But Bible is a book of compression. So what I'm saying is, if the chapters from Genesis 1 through 5, if Adam's descendants were recorded everything that they have done, it would not be 66 books, but even more, and even that could not contain all of that. And the people who participated in constructing, if they had written all the names and what they did, and if that was written in the Bible, we could not have read that. But the Bible compresses this in numbers. If I am not a part of it, or someone else who does not belong takes part, then this number is not counted. God compressed the number of people who participated and recorded this in the Bible. We have to take a look at three things when we look at the number of people who participated. And first is by duty. 1 Kings 5, verses 13 through 16, and by class. 1 Kings 5, 13 through 16, and 2 Chronicles 8, 9, verses 9 through 10, and by nation. And 2 Chronicles 2, verses 17 through 18. When we take a look at this, we can look at how many people were used to construct Solomon's temple. First is according to the work done on site. When we look at 1 Kings 5, verse 13, it says, King Solomon levied forced laborers from all Israel. Forced laborers is not a certain position, but the number of laborers, that was 30,000. And when we look at verse 14, he sent them in relays in 1 month. So they worked for a month and stayed at home for a month, and in the third month they would come back and work. And in verse 15, now Solomon had 70,000 transporters and 80,000 hewers of stone in the mountains. Besides Solomon's 3,300 chief deputies who were over the project. So there were 70,000 transporters and 80,000 people who hewed stone, and 3,300 chief deputies. So in other words, 183,300 people on site. When we look at 1 Kings 6, verse 7, it said there was not a hammer or axe or iron tool heard in the house while it was being built. So they had completed it and they had transported it to Jerusalem. And these chief deputies looked over the project and people transported it, and that's how they worked. And under hewers of stone, I wrote this because in our culture, we have people who hew stone and people who cut down trees. But in Israel, there are not much trees. But when we look at the English translation of Jesus' job, we say he's a carpenter. But this job was a person who actually hewed stone or used wood. So they are categorized as one. The second are chief officers over Solomon's work. First Kings 9 verse 23 says chief officers who were over Solomon's work for 550. And 2 Chronicles 8 verses 9 through 10 says in more detail that there were 250 people of Israel and 300 people that managed who were aliens. And 2 Chronicles 2 verses 17 through 18 records the number of alien laborers. 70,000 carried loads, 80,000 quarried stones, and there were 3,600 supervisors. So when we calculate this, there were 153,300 alien laborers. So we saw that there were 300 senior managers or chief officers. So among this, 3,300 were not chief managers, they were just managers, and 300 were chief managers. So when we combine all this together, the laborers of Israel was 30,000, transporters 70,000, and hewers of stone in the mountains was 80,000. And the chief officers of Israel were 250, and the chief officers of the aliens were 300, and the just chief or just officers was 3,300. And why do we need to take a look at this in such detail? And why did the senior pastor say this was revealed for the first time in history? Let's take a look at the redemptive historical administration. First, there are significantly more aliens or Gentiles. 183,850 out of those people, there were 153,600 aliens. It's a great number of Gentiles. When we look at Ephesians 3 verse 6, they may be Gentiles by air, but spiritually they are the descendants of Abraham. Galatians 3 verse 14, even though they are Gentiles, they receive the blessing of Abraham and will receive the promise of the Spirit through faith. You and I, by air, we are not Israelites, but spiritually we are Israelites and are participating as the covenantal people in constructing God's temple, and we must believe in this. Small point number 2, the numbers were recorded without omission. Even if I am just taking a rest or I work, but I am so fatigued that I am resting and sitting down, God had recorded all those people. He did not lose even one. And He counted the people who need to be restored and completed this temple. Numbers 1 verses 45 to 46. He recorded the number of people who He established the covenant with. And God said that He counts the names and gives names and calls them by name. And this is in Psalms 147 verse 4. Today, you and I, who have been called to complete Ezekiel's temple and complete this amazing work, God counts us without omission, and we must believe that God will restore us and use us. Isaiah 40, verse 26 says, "Lift up your eyes on high and see who has created these stars, the one who leads forth their hosts by number. He calls them all by name." God calls us each by name and fills the number that He has destined. And God will fulfill what He has planned. In conclusion, the completion of Solomon's temple and the work of the new city of Jerusalem. In completing Solomon's temple, when we look at 2 Samuel 7, verses 12 to 13, through the Davidic covenant, God established that Solomon's temple will be built, and the pattern that He showed to David was passed down to Solomon. And Solomon himself did not build it, but he had a great number of laborers who worked with him. But when you look at 1 Chronicles 29, verse 19, and 2 Chronicles 8, verse 16, it said the temple was made perfectly and completed. The temple of history of redemption, which God desires to build, He called you and I, and we are so lacking. But the pattern that God has planned, there will be work where that is all completed, just as He wants. And when we look at Revelation 21, verses 1 through 4, this temple is the new Jerusalem that comes down from heaven. You and I today, we are constructors who restore the order and authority of 평강제일 Church. But not only that, we are constructors who are called to build the new city of Jerusalem. There are people who are not here with us today, are not able to be with us today, or have not yet met the word of redemptive history. And we must proclaim and testify of this word. And through the feast of that complete God's work, God will call each of us and use us in our places so that we will go into the heavenly storehouse of heaven and be with God for eternity. And it will never be so that we repeat the Passover again, so because sin repeats itself, but we will be with God and become the laborers that fulfill this work of God. Let's pray together. Father God, full of love and grace, we thank you. With your grace, you have taught us and brought us as missioners to build this and construct this temple and have called us to testify, and we sincerely thank you. The work that you have planned is all according to your time and takes place perfectly. May all the people who are called, you use all of them without leaving anyone behind. May the saints of Pyungkang who have been called to construct the temple of redemptive history, may we reply with Amen and be used to fulfill your work of construction. May the saints of Pyungkang restore the order and authority of the church and be used as laborers for construction and ultimately be fulfilled so that we complete your temple. And we entrust everything to you and pray in the name of Jesus Christ with thanksgiving. Amen.